The air was thick with tension as the sun dipped lower, casting an orange glow over the quiet street. It was a typical afternoon for many, but for two strangers, this moment would change their lives forever. It started as a simple traffic stop, one that seemed like it would be nothing more than an ordinary encounter between a cop and a civilian. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. A seemingly random act of aggression would set the stage for a story that would leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, prejudice, and the unexpected twists of fate. A racist cop, already brimming with frustration from a long day, spots a black man, minding his own business on the road. He doesn't know him, doesn't care to, and immediately makes a snap judgment. His anger boils over, and without a second thought, he punches the man, trying to intimidate him, assert control, and make a statement. But in that moment, he has no idea who he's really messing with. The black man, though calm and composed in the face of the violence, isn't just any ordinary civilian. He's an undercover FBI agent. A moment of racial bias and unchecked power would soon meet the cold, calculated response of the law, but the twist in this story doesn't stop there. As the scene unfolds, you'll witness how a single act of violence can ignite a chain reaction of events, all spiraling into something far bigger than any of the people involved could have imagined. The cop, blinded by his prejudices, doesn't realize that the man he's hurting has the ability to take down everything he's worked for. The agent, though caught off guard, remains cool under pressure, knowing that the fight for justice doesn't always look the way we expect it to. But that's not all. While the cop's racism takes center stage in one part of the story, there's another chapter unfolding elsewhere. Imagine this: a black teen on a crowded bus, quietly sitting, when a pregnant white woman enters. In a world where tensions run high, this teen, without hesitation, stands up and offers her his seat. A simple, kind gesture, but one that would change his life forever. This woman, unbeknownst to him, is about to hand him a note, one that would turn everything he thought he knew about his future upside down. What's written on that note? And what happens when these two seemingly unrelated stories collide? How does a racist cop's moment of violence against an FBI agent and a teenager's small act of kindness intertwine in a way that no one could predict? Stay tuned as we dive deeper into these stories, exploring the ripple effects of a single punch, the power of small acts of kindness, and how fate can bring even the most unlikely people together in the most unexpected ways. You won't believe the twists and turns the story takes, and how it leaves you questioning the very nature of power, justice, and human connection. This is just the beginning. The truth is about to come out. But to know what happens next, you'll have to keep watching. The sun had barely begun to set when the tension started to rise on the streets. Officer Sam Bennett, a man who had spent years patrolling the city, always looking for trouble before it could find him, had already had a bad day. His shift had been long, his patience shorter than ever, and the relentless noise of the city wore on him like a constant drumbeat. When he spotted the black man driving a beat-up sedan, something inside him snapped. Maybe it was the way the man's car didn't quite belong on the street, or the look on his face, calm and steady, that seemed to challenge the world around him. Whatever it was, Bennett decided then and there that this was going to be a stop he would control no matter what. He pulled the car over, his sirens blaring in the quiet of the evening. The man in the car, whose name was Elijah Cooper, barely flinched. He'd been pulled over plenty of times before and knew the drill all too well. He wasn't worried about the cop, though something told him this encounter wouldn't be like the others. Elijah wasn't just any man. He had been living under the radar for years, his life a series of calculated steps to stay one step ahead of those who might threaten his mission. Undercover work had hardened him, but not in the way most people thought. It had taught him patience, a steely calm, and a deep understanding of people's motivations. He could read someone's body language in an instant, and right now, he could see it in Bennett's eyes, the anger, the frustration, and beneath that, something darker. As Officer Bennett approached the car, his hand was already on his baton, ready to make an example of the driver. He didn't care if Elijah was just another citizen minding his own business. His mind had already decided. This man was trouble. "Step out of the car," Bennett barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Elijah took a slow breath, not because he was scared, but because he knew the moment he stepped out, things would escalate. He'd been trained to deal with situations like this, but the overwhelming sense of injustice in Bennett's tone made his blood run cold. He did as ordered, stepping out of the car and raising his hands slightly in a non-threatening gesture, trying to gauge the officer's next move. "You got a problem, boy?" Bennett's voice was filled with disdain, and the word, boy, stung more than Elijah was willing to admit. But there was no time to dwell on it. Elijah could feel the shift in the air, the cop's hostility growing. His instinct screamed that this wasn't just about a simple traffic stop, it was something more. "I'm just trying to get home, officer," Elijah said, keeping his voice steady, his eyes on Bennett's every movement. But Bennett didn't hear him. Instead, he lunged forward, shoving Elijah with the force of someone who had made up their mind long before the interaction had begun. The punch came without warning, a sharp, brutal swing that landed square on Elijah's jaw. The sound of it echoed in the night, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. But Elijah wasn't someone who would crumble at the first sign of force. His training kicked in, and though his jaw throbbed, he stood his ground. Bennett, too, seemed momentarily taken aback by Elijah's resilience. He had expected a reaction, maybe fear, maybe anger, but what he got instead was a calm determination that threw him off balance. And it was then that Elijah's hand subtly brushed his shirt, the hidden badge that marked him for who he truly was, an FBI agent. The moment Bennett saw it, his world tilted. He had no idea who this man was, no idea that the person he had just assaulted was not just some random civilian but a trained law enforcement officer. The fear began to sink in. He tried to mask it, pushing it away, but the growing realization that his rash actions might have just ruined his career began to settle in. Meanwhile, across the city, the streets of the bus station were filled with the usual crowd, people rushing to get home, some distracted by their phones, others lost in their own thoughts. Among them, a teenager named Marcus Thompson stood, looking at the sea of faces, trying to ignore the jostling crowds. Marcus had always kept to himself, not out of fear, but out of habit. He had grown up in a neighborhood where violence was never far away, where looking over your shoulder was second nature. But that day, something had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but when the pregnant woman entered the bus, his instincts told him that this moment, too, was different. She stood there, holding her belly, looking around for a seat, but not saying a word. The crowded bus made it nearly impossible for her to find one. Marcus, watching her for a few seconds, felt a tug at his heart. He knew what it was like to struggle, to go unnoticed, to feel like the world was too heavy on your shoulders. And though he wasn't the kind of person to go out of his way for anyone, he couldn't ignore the look on her face. Without thinking, he stood up and offered her a seat. It was a small act, a quiet gesture, but it spoke volumes. The woman, surprised at first, smiled and thanked him, her hand resting lightly on her belly. As she sat down, she rummaged through her bag, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "Here," she said, handing it to Marcus. "This is for you." Marcus took the note, confused. He had no idea who this woman was or why she was giving him anything. As he unfolded the paper, his eyes widened. The note was simple, written in a neat, flowing hand. "You have potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Seek the right path, and you'll find everything you're looking for. My contact information is on the back. Don't waste this opportunity." What did this mean? Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know what to make of it, but he knew one thing for certain. Something had just shifted. This wasn't just a random act of kindness, it was something more. But what? As Marcus sat there, staring at the note, the world around him seemed to blur. He didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness, this simple moment of connection, was about to lead him down a path he never could have imagined. Back at the scene of the altercation, Elijah stood still, the blood from his split lip beginning to dry on his skin. He knew that things had escalated far beyond a simple punch. His mind was already working, thinking about the next steps, about how he would report this, how he would deal with the consequences of being outed in such a public way. The cop, meanwhile, seemed like a deer caught in headlights, trying to figure out how to salvage what he had just destroyed. Neither of them knew that the day's events were about to ripple outward, affecting more lives than they could have ever imagined. The clock was ticking, and the pieces of this story were slowly, silently, starting to fall into place. The minutes after the punch seemed to drag on forever, the air thick with an uneasy silence. Bennett's hand was still clenched into a fist, hanging in the air as if he were waiting for the punch to land again. But it didn't. Elijah just stood there, his posture relaxed despite the swelling pain in his jaw. It was a strange moment, one where the world felt caught between two realities. One where Elijah was just another victim of an unjust system, and another where he was a man with the power to bring everything crashing down. Bennett's mind raced, trying to find an escape from the mess he had just created. His breath was shallow, sweat beading on his forehead, a sudden panic creeping into his chest. The adrenaline had surged in him, but now it was starting to fade, and what was left was cold fear. He had attacked a man he didn't know, a man who, in his mind, was just another black face that made him uncomfortable. But now, everything had changed. This wasn't just any civilian. He had assaulted someone who could destroy everything Bennett had worked for, someone who had the power to expose his deep-seated prejudice and strip him of his badge. Elijah wasn't a random stranger. He was a threat, and Bennett knew it. "You have no idea who I am, do you?" Elijah's voice cut through the thick tension, calm and measured. His words didn't have the anger or fear that Bennett had expected. There was something much more unsettling about that calmness. Bennett blinked, his grip on his baton tightening. "What do you mean?" Elijah took a slow breath, his gaze steady, piercing. "You just hit an FBI agent. Do you have any idea what you've done?" The words landed with a heavy thud, and for a moment, Bennett felt the blood drain from his face. He had no clue. His instincts, his anger, had all led him to this moment, this confrontation that could change the trajectory of his life forever. I didn't know," Bennett stammered, his voice faltering for the first time. "I didn't." "You didn't think," Elijah interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper, but with a weight that felt like a slap. "That's the problem. You never think. You just act on whatever's inside you. You let your prejudices guide you, and now you've made a dangerous mistake." Bennett's heart hammered in his chest, but before he could speak, a distant siren interrupted the tension. Elijah's eyes flickered briefly to the sound, his instincts immediately on high alert. He had to move fast. He wasn't just dealing with a rogue cop. He was dealing with a man who could collapse under the pressure of his own actions. And Elijah didn't have time to waste. "I suggest you call for backup," Elijah said, his tone turning colder. "Because the moment I report this, your career is over." The siren grew louder, and Bennett's worst fear became real. He knew that no matter what he did now, it was over. There was no hiding from this. Meanwhile, miles away, Marcus sat in his room, staring at the crumpled note in his hands. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woman who had given it to him wasn't just a random stranger. The words were cryptic, but there was a certainty in them that made his heart race. "You have potential. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." It was almost like she had known him, like she had seen something in him that he had never seen in himself. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. Who was she, and why had she singled him out? Marcus had always felt invisible, like he was just another face in the crowd, blending in with the noise of the city. But this note, it made him feel like he was on the verge of something big. He couldn't just let it go. He had to find out what it meant, what the woman was trying to tell him. He turned the note over in his hands, revealing a phone number scrawled on the back. His fingers hovered over the digits, unsure whether to call or leave it all behind. But deep down, something in him told him this wasn't the kind of opportunity you walked away from. The moment had come. He had to take it. With a shaky breath, he picked up his phone and dialed the number. Back at the scene with Bennett and Elijah, the officer's phone buzzed in his pocket, shaking him out of his panic for a brief moment. He didn't want to answer it. He was too consumed by the mess he had made, by the fear of what Elijah would do next. But the buzzing wouldn't stop, so he reluctantly pulled the phone out. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, and when he answered, there was only silence for a few seconds before a voice broke through. "Bennett," the voice said, sharp and direct. "You have a problem." It was his superior. Bennett felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He hadn't been this scared in years. But before he could speak, the voice continued, colder now. "There's been an incident. A big one. You're needed at the station now." There's something I need to report," Bennett muttered, his voice shaking. "I just got into an altercation with someone. It wasn't just a regular stop, he's an FBI agent." There was a long pause, followed by a curse. "You did what?" The voice on the other end snapped, and Bennett could hear the disbelief, the anger. "It wasn't supposed to go down like this," Bennett mumbled, his words tripping over each other. "I just lost control. You need to fix this. Now. Don't make a scene. We'll handle it. Just get to the station. This is bigger than you think." As the call ended, Bennett's mind reeled. It was all falling apart. The pressure was mounting from every angle, and the fear he had felt earlier was turning into a heavy weight on his chest. Elijah's calmness, his unshaken demeanor, only made things worse. How could he come back from this? Could he? Meanwhile, across town, Marcus had hung up the phone, his heart racing. He had left a message. It wasn't much, just his name, his number, and a promise that he would meet whoever had left the note. But the fear gnawing at his stomach told him something was off. There was more to this than he understood. And as the day slipped into night, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Back on the streets, Bennett's thoughts were interrupted when Elijah finally spoke again. "I won't forget this," he said, his voice colder than ever. "You've made an enemy today, and I don't forget easily." The words hit Bennett like a punch to the gut. Elijah wasn't just some random victim. He was a man with power, with resources, and with the kind of determination that Bennett had never known. And right now, all he could do was wait. The city was darker now, the evening settling in with a heavy stillness that seemed to press down on everyone. Elijah stood under the dim glow of a street lamp, his eyes locked on Bennett. He hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, as if he were watching the officer unravel in slow motion. The quiet between them stretched, heavy and thick, each second a pulse that threatened to drown Bennett in the weight of his own fear. The sirens from earlier had long faded, but Bennett's mind buzzed with an unrelenting urgency. His shift was over, but there was no way he could go home now. Not after what he'd done. He had to find a way out, a way to fix this, but the walls felt like they were closing in. Elijah had him trapped, not physically but mentally. Every word Elijah spoke cut deeper, a reminder that he wasn't just dealing with a man he could overpower, a man who would just take the blow and let it go. Elijah was something else. His calm, his control, it was like nothing Bennett had ever experienced. "What do you want from me?" Bennett finally blurted, his voice strained with desperation. Elijah didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just stared at Bennett, as if measuring the officer's very soul. His eyes weren't filled with hatred, but something colder, something far more dangerous. "What I want isn't up to you anymore." Bennett swallowed hard, the air suddenly thick in his throat. "I didn't mean it, man. It's just the pressure. You gotta understand." His words sounded hollow even to himself, and he knew it. He had lost control, but admitting that to Elijah, or to anyone, felt like he was admitting his own defeat. And in a moment of rare honesty, he realized he was scared, more scared than he'd ever been in his entire life. Elijah didn't reply right away, just watched him. His stillness was like a storm waiting to break. And then, when he spoke, it wasn't the words Bennett was expecting. "You really think the pressure's the problem?" Elijah's voice was low, deliberate, as if each word was a stone being dropped into a pond, sending ripples across everything Bennett thought he knew. "It's not pressure that makes a man act the way you did. It's what's inside. What's always been inside." Bennett's breath caught in his chest. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but the truth of Elijah's words hit him like a freight train. He had never really thought about it like that. All his life, he had justified his actions, his bias, his quick judgment, as a reaction to the world around him. But Elijah was right. There was something deeper, something inside him that he had never wanted to face. The fear, the anger, the quick-to-react impulse. They were his and no one else's. I'm not a racist, Bennett blurted out, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew how weak they sounded. His own voice betrayed him, revealing the cracks in the armor he'd spent years building. Elijah was right, but Bennett wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Elijah stepped closer, his presence looming like a shadow that stretched across the pavement. You don't have to say it, Bennett. The truth is clear enough. The officer took a step back, suddenly feeling small, exposed. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. His mind raced, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation, but all he saw was Elijah's unshakable calm. It was terrifying. The agent wasn't just playing the game. He was rewriting the rules. And Bennett was losing. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Marcus was still grappling with the note. The woman's words played over and over in his mind, each phrase stirring something deep inside him. You have potential. He didn't know why, but it felt like a promise, like she was offering him a chance to change his life, to do something bigger than he ever imagined. But what was it? What was this path she had pointed him toward? He could feel it, deep in his gut. This wasn't just some random note left on a bus. This woman knew something about him. She'd seen him, really seen him in a way that no one else had. And that made him both curious and terrified. The phone call he'd made had gone unanswered, and now the silence was even more unsettling. The uncertainty gnawed at him, pushing him to the edge. He had to know what this was about. He couldn't just sit here, not with his future, his potential, hanging in the balance. Taking a deep breath, Marcus stood up, pacing the small space of his room. His eyes darted toward the phone again. He couldn't wait any longer. Whatever was waiting for him, whatever the woman was offering, he had to find out. He grabbed his jacket, his hands shaking with a mix of excitement and fear, and headed for the door. This was the moment, the point of no return. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he couldn't turn back now. Back on the streets, the tension between Elijah and Bennett was palpable, both men standing like titans waiting for the other to make a move. Bennett's head swam with confusion, his mind screaming for a way out. But Elijah wasn't done with him yet. No. He still had one more piece to drop, and it would hit Bennett harder than anything else. You think this is over? Elijah's voice cut through the night air. His gaze never wavered, and the intensity in his words made Bennett flinch. This isn't just about you and me. You've made a bigger mess than you realize. There are forces bigger than you at play here, Bennett. And if you think you can hide behind your badge, behind your excuses, you're wrong. Bennett's throat went dry. What do you mean? What do you want from me? Elijah took another step forward, his voice steady, but filled with a quiet fury. You'll find out soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you had never crossed my path. The threat in Elijah's words was unmistakable. It wasn't just an empty threat, it was a promise. And as the shadows seemed to close in, Bennett realized just how far he had fallen. He wasn't in control anymore. At the same moment, Marcus stepped out into the night, heading toward an unknown meeting, unaware that his life was about to intersect with the dangerous web Bennett had tangled himself in. The chaos was building, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The next few hours would change everything, but none of them knew how, or in which direction it would go. The storm was coming, and no one would be left untouched. As Marcus walked through the darkened streets, his heart pounded harder with each step, the weight of the note still heavy in his pocket. His thoughts raced, but the more he thought about it, the less he understood. What was this about? Who was the woman, and why had she singled him out? He wasn't the kind of person who attracted attention, at least not for good reasons. The people in his life barely noticed him, and if they did, it was because he was either the quiet kid in the back or the one who kept his head down, trying not to stir up trouble. He reached the corner of the street where the city lights seemed to flicker and buzz in the distance, casting a dim glow over the cracked pavement. The air was thick with the scent of rain, though the clouds had yet to break. He pulled his jacket tighter around him, both for warmth and to shield the note in his pocket from the moisture. Suddenly, the faint sound of footsteps reached his ears, quick, purposeful steps, echoing off the buildings. Marcus paused, his instincts kicking in. He wasn't alone. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Slowly, he turned, his eyes scanning the shadows, trying to make out the figure moving toward him. And then he saw her. The woman from the bus. The one who had given him the note. She appeared out of nowhere, her presence sharp and undeniable. She was standing just a few feet away now, her silhouette barely visible in the dark. The tension in the air grew heavier as he saw her face, strange, almost unreadable, like she was holding back a secret. But this time, there was something different about her. Something urgent in the way she moved. "You came," she said, her voice quiet but steady, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Marcus nodded, though a sense of unease was creeping over him. I didn't know what to expect. What is this about? Why me?" The woman stepped closer, and in the moonlight, he could see that her eyes were dark, intense, as if she were carrying a burden heavier than he could understand. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she handed him another piece of paper, this one folded even more carefully than the first, the edges crisp and sharp. Her hands shook slightly as she passed it to him, and the quick glance she shot over her shoulder seemed to carry an unspoken warning. "Open it when you're alone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And be careful. There are people watching you. People who want to stop this from happening." Marcus hesitated. The gravity of her words hit him like a slap. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but something in her gaze told him that doing so would only put him in danger. He took the paper, his fingers brushing hers for a split second, and in that fleeting moment, he felt a strange jolt of energy surge through him. Something about her, about all of this, felt off. Before he could say anything else, she was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the shadows, leaving Marcus standing alone on the street, the night closing in around him. The only trace of her presence was the cold paper in his hand and the growing sense of dread gnawing at his gut. Marcus quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket and turned to head home, the unease following him like a dark cloud. But the streets felt different now, as if the city itself was holding its breath. He didn't know what was happening or who exactly was watching him, but he could feel the shift in the air. Something had changed, and it wasn't just the note. The stakes had just been raised, and he wasn't sure if he could handle what was coming. Back at the scene with Elijah and Bennett, the tension had reached a boiling point. Bennett's heart was hammering in his chest, his palms slick with sweat. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, each moment threatening to expose him, to ruin him completely. But Elijah wasn't done. He was waiting, biding his time, making sure Bennett understood the full extent of what had just happened. "You don't get it, do you?" Elijah's voice was colder now, harder. "This isn't just about you and me. This is about something much bigger. You're not the only one who's been playing the game. You've been a pawn in a much larger operation. You've been manipulated. Used." Bennett's mind raced, but he couldn't grasp what Elijah was saying. "What are you talking about? Who's been using me?" Elijah's eyes flickered, something dark and dangerous behind them. "There's a network of people, Bennett. Powerful people. People who don't want this truth coming out. They've been covering their tracks for years, and you just walked right into their mess." Bennett's stomach dropped. His hands trembled as he tried to process Elijah's words. The weight of them crushed him, suffocating him. Who were these people? What truth was Elijah talking about? I don't know what you mean," Bennett stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Elijah stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You will. Soon enough." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken threats and promises. Bennett wanted to scream, to demand answers, but he couldn't. Something in Elijah's eyes told him that if he pushed too hard, he might never get the chance to find out the truth. Before Bennett could speak, his phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket, the screen lighting up with a text from an unknown number. His heart skipped a beat as he read the message. "They know about you. Meet me now." Panic surged in his chest, and he looked up at Elijah. But the agent was already walking away, disappearing into the shadows, leaving Bennett alone with his fear, his confusion, and a new, terrifying sense of urgency. As he stood there, frozen, the weight of the situation started to sink in. This was bigger than a simple traffic stop. This was a conspiracy, one that reached deeper than he could imagine. And now, somehow, he was tangled up in it. The people behind all of this knew who he was, and they weren't going to let him walk away from it unscathed. But just as Bennett made the decision to follow the cryptic message, the ground beneath him seemed to shift once again. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement, swift and deliberate. He turned, and before he could react, a figure lunged at him from the darkness, pushing him to the ground. In the chaos that followed, a voice whispered, cold and menacing, "You should have never crossed that line." Bennett hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him as the weight of the figure pressed against him. He struggled, trying to push himself up, but his arms felt weak, and the figure's hands were strong, forcing him to stay pinned. The darkness around him seemed to swallow the street, the only light coming from the faint glow of distant street lamps that barely illuminated the scene. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat feeling like it was a countdown to something far worse. The voice above him was low, almost taunting. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Bennett's mind raced as he fought to break free. He couldn't let this happen. He couldn't let whoever this was get the upper hand. His hands found the baton at his side, and with one swift movement, he swung it, aiming for the figure's head. But the person was quick, dodging the strike with ease. They leaned in closer, their face now just inches from Bennett's. "You should have listened, Bennett. Now you've really done it." Before Bennett could respond, a sharp crack echoed through the air. The figure collapsed to the side, crumpling in a heap as the loud report of a gunshot rang out. Bennett blinked, disoriented, and looked to see Elijah standing a few feet away, his weapon lowered. The agent's face was unreadable, a cold calculation in his eyes as he surveyed the fallen figure. "You okay?" Elijah asked, his voice more neutral than concerned. Bennett scrambled to his feet, his mind still racing. "What? Who was that? What's going on?" Elijah didn't answer right away, his gaze shifting to the body on the ground, then back to Bennett. "You've been in the dark for too long," he said quietly. "You really had no idea who was pulling the strings, did you?" Bennett's confusion deepened. "What the hell are you talking about?" Elijah let out a long, weary sigh, almost as if he were disappointed. "You've been part of something bigger than yourself, Bennett. You've been used, manipulated, by people you thought were your allies, by people who made you a pawn in a game you couldn't see." Bennett's stomach churned as the pieces began to fall into place, but they didn't fit. Nothing made sense. "I don't understand. Who's been using me?" Elijah stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "The woman you met? She wasn't just some random stranger. She's been on the inside. She's been working for us, fighting the people who've been pulling your strings." Bennett's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, fighting?" His mind was struggling to keep up with the web of lies and half-truths being revealed, and he had no idea who to trust anymore. "That woman," Elijah continued, "she's the key. She knew you'd eventually mess up, and she was the one who reached out to you. You didn't just stumble into this, Bennett. You were brought in whether you realized it or not." Bennett's eyes widened. "So, you knew everything? You set me up?" Elijah's lips curled into a grim smile. "No, not exactly. I'm not the enemy here. But I've been trying to stop this for a long time, and you've been in the way. Not directly, but your actions? They've been used against you." The realization hit Bennett like a punch to the gut. He had been nothing but a puppet in a game that was far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. His actions, his choices, they weren't his at all. They had all been manipulated, crafted for a larger purpose, one he hadn't even known existed. "You have one chance to make this right," Elijah said, his voice now sharper, more urgent. "There's a bigger network involved, and they're going to come for you. You need to understand what you're up against. The FBI, they're not who you think they are." Before Bennett could respond, a phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out shakily, glancing at the screen. It was another text, this time from a familiar number. "You've been compromised." Move quickly, or it's over. A chill ran down Bennett's spine. The woman. Who was she really? And what had Elijah meant by the FBI isn't who you think they are? But before he could process anything further, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, growing louder with every passing second. Bennett's mind raced. He had moments, maybe seconds, before everything spiraled out of control. You've got to move, Bennett, Elijah said urgently, grabbing his arm. They're coming for you. This is bigger than just you and me now. Get out of here. I'll buy you some time. Bennett didn't hesitate. The urgency in Elijah's voice left him no choice. Without a word, he turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest, adrenaline flooding his veins. His thoughts were a blur of confusion and fear, and yet a strange sense of clarity began to emerge as he ran deeper into the night. He didn't know who to trust anymore. He didn't know who was behind all of this, but one thing was clear. The stakes were higher than he'd ever realized, and now he had to survive. As he disappeared into the shadows, the sirens finally arrived, their flashing lights painting the street in a surreal, chaotic rhythm. Bennett's heart slammed in his chest as he ducked into an alley, his breath ragged. And just as he thought he had escaped, just as the weight of everything began to settle, he heard a voice from behind him. You think you can run, Bennett? You think you can outrun this? Bennett froze, his heart skipping a beat. He turned slowly, his breath caught in his throat as he saw her again, the woman. But this time, her expression was different. Cold, calculating. A smirk curled on her lips as she stepped closer, the final twist settling in like a blade to the heart. Welcome to the real game, she said, her voice filled with a dark satisfaction. And with that, the world around Bennett collapsed into darkness. Bennett stood frozen, his mind spinning as the woman slowly closed the distance between them. The street around him was eerily silent now, the chaos of the past few minutes fading into a heavy, suffocating quiet. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, suffocating him, as if the entire world was holding its breath. You're not going to run anymore, Bennett, the woman said, her voice calm, yet filled with a quiet certainty that sent chills down his spine. She stepped closer, her movements fluid, deliberate. It's over. His throat tightened, and for a moment, he didn't know what to say. What could he say? How could he fight against someone who had orchestrated everything, his entire fall, his rise, the way his life had become twisted into this web of lies and manipulation? You've been playing the wrong game all along, she continued, her eyes locked on his, as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. You never knew who was behind the scenes, pulling the strings. You thought you were just a cop just doing your job. But you've been a pawn in a much bigger play. Bennett's mind raced. The pieces had never fit together, and now it was clear why. He wasn't just a man caught in the crossfire. He was part of something so much larger, so much more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He had been manipulated, used by the very people he trusted the most. The FBI, the system, his career, it had all been a lie. But why me? Bennett finally managed to choke out, his voice raw. Why did you pick me? I'm just a guy doing my job. The woman's lips curled into a tight smile, though there was no warmth in it. That's the problem, Bennett. You thought you were just doing your job. But you weren't. Not anymore. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He had been part of something darker than he could comprehend. And all of it was connected to the FBI, to the forces that had controlled him, directed his actions, made him an instrument in their grand design. The conspiracy was far more extensive than he could have ever known. Before he could respond, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing against his as she did. Bennett took it without thinking, the weight of it feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. Open it, she said simply. His hands shook as he unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the words written in tight, controlled handwriting. You've been exposed. The truth about you is out. You can't hide from what you've done, but you can make a choice. Leave now and disappear. Or stay and face the consequences. You are not the person you think you are. The words blurred in front of his eyes, but the meaning was clear. His entire life, his career, his identity, it had all been built on a lie. The weight of that truth threatened to crush him, but deep inside, a flicker of defiance burned. No matter what he had done, no matter what had been done to him, he wasn't going to let this define him. "Who are you really?" Bennett asked, his voice low, barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence between them, and in that silence, Bennett felt as though he were standing on the edge of something immense, something that could swallow him whole if he wasn't careful. "I'm someone who's seen the truth," she said quietly. "I know what the system is. I know how it works. And I know that you have the power to change things. If you walk away now, if you disappear into the shadows, they'll forget about you. But if you stay, if you fight," she paused, her gaze hardening, "you could be the one who brings it all down. You could be the one who exposes the lies, who takes them all down." Bennett's mind reeled. He wasn't sure if he could believe her, but he didn't have time to process it all. The sirens were getting louder again, echoing through the night as they neared. He didn't have much time. "I don't know if I can do this," Bennett admitted, his voice cracking as he looked at her, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can fight this." The woman took a step closer, her gaze softening for the first time. "I'm not asking you to fight alone. You don't have to carry this burden by yourself. But you have to decide right now. Will you run, or will you fight?" Bennett stood there, his heart pounding, every nerve in his body screaming for an answer, a decision. The truth was right in front of him, raw and undeniable. He had been part of the machine, a cog in a system that manipulated him, that used him. But now he had the power to change everything. The sirens were almost on top of them now, and with a final glance at the woman, Bennett made his choice. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to let the system win. "I'll fight," he said, his voice steady, filled with a resolve he didn't know he had until now. "I'll bring them all down." The woman nodded, a slight smile crossing her lips. "Then it begins. Welcome to the real fight, Bennett." As the sirens finally pulled into view, Bennett turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. This was just the beginning. He didn't know what lay ahead, what battles he would have to face, but for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. The kind of hope that only comes from knowing that, no matter what, you have the power to change your own fate. And as the dark figure of the woman disappeared into the shadows behind him, Bennett couldn't help but wonder. Was she really on his side? Or was she just another piece of the puzzle, leading him into an even darker game? But that didn't matter now. He had made his choice. And the truth, for better or for worse, was finally going to come to light. The game had changed. And there was no turning back.